All right, let's dive into one of the most chaotic, world-changing events in all of history, the French Revolution. This is a story about liberty, but it's also about terror. It's about the birth of modern ideas like freedom and equality. But man, it was a bloody birth. So the big question is, what could possibly push an entire nation over the edge like this? Well, that's what we're here to figure out. Picture this. It's July 14th, 1789, in Paris. Thousands of angry citizens are swarming the Bastille. Now, you have to understand, this wasn't just some old building. The Bastille was this giant, looming medieval fortress that represented the king's absolute oppressive power. So when they attacked it, they weren't just looking for weapons. No way. They were sending a message. They were attacking the very idea of the monarchy itself. And just like that, a symbol of tyranny had fallen. It was this massive, explosive moment. But here's the thing, explosions don't come out of nowhere, right? The fall of the Bastille was really just the spark, the gunpowder. Years and years of inequality, of hunger, of radical new ideas had been piling up for decades. So what exactly created this perfect storm? To get it, we've got to go back and look at all the ingredients.
So, first up, let's look at France's breaking point. This is the fuel for the fire.
Okay, so before the revolution, France had this really old, really rigid social structure left over from the Middle Ages. Society was split into three groups, or estates. You had the first estate, which was the clergy, the church. The second estate was all the nobility. And the third estate, well, that was literally everyone else. We're talking everyone from the poorest peasant to the richest city merchant. And when you look at the numbers, it's just staggering. The first and second estates, the clergy and the nobility, they made up maybe 1 or 2% of the entire population. The third estate, on the other hand, was about 90% of the country. And yet, who held all the power? That tiny little privileged minority. And the inequality, oh man, it went way deeper than just population size. The first and second estates, they basically lived in a different reality. They owned about 60% of the land, they got all the best jobs, and this is the real kicker, they paid almost no taxes. The entire financial weight of the country, it was sitting squarely on the shoulders of the third estate. And this tax burden was absolutely crushing. I mean, just look at it. The third estate had to pay a tithe to the church, which was 1/10 of everything they grew. They paid a direct tax, the tail, straight to the state, and on top of all that, there were indirect taxes on everyday things you couldn't live without, like salt. All while the wealthiest people in the kingdom paid next to nothing. You can just feel the anger simmering, can't you? So, you've got this deep, systemic inequality. And then you add a much more immediate problem, straight-up hunger. A series of bad harvests meant the price of bread, the main food for most people, went through the roof. This created what's called a subsistence crisis. People were literally starving. Food riots were breaking out. The population was getting desperate, and desperate people are ready for drastic change. Okay. Next section, ideas fueling revolution. Because if all that social inequality was the fuel, then the philosophy of the Enlightenment, that was the ignition. This spark came from a movement called the Enlightenment. You had these brilliant thinkers, guys like John Locke, Jean-Jacques Rousseau, Montesquieu, and they were proposing these completely radical new ideas. They were saying, hey, wait a minute, a person's worth should be based on merit, not what family they were born into. They argued that a government's power comes from a social contract with the people, not from some divine right from God. It was like they were handing over the blueprint for a brand new world. And this quote from Rousseau, my goodness, man is born free and everywhere he is in chains. For the millions of people in the third estate, those words must have been absolutely electrifying. It was a message that said, this system you're living under, it's not natural, it's not permanent, it's a set of man-made chains, and that means those chains can be broken. But how do you spread these big, complex ideas to everyone, especially when a lot of people couldn't read? Well, the revolutionaries were smart. They used powerful, simple symbols. A broken chain became the symbol for freedom. A tablet with the law on it stood for equality before the law. These simple images were like political memes, spreading these incredibly complex philosophies to the masses. And here we go, Section 3, the people rise up. With all that fuel and that powerful spark in place, the eruption was pretty much inevitable. And boy, did things move fast in 1789. In May, the king calls a meeting of the Estates General, but the voting is completely rigged against the Third Estate. So what do? They get locked out, so they go to a nearby tennis court, declare themselves the new government, the National Assembly, and swear an oath to write a new constitution. Less than a month after that, the Bastille falls. The revolution was on.
So, by 1791, the National Assembly actually did it. They drafted a constitution. This thing transformed France into a constitutional monarchy. Basically, the king was still around, but his absolute power was gone. It was now limited and separated between a legislature, an executive, and a judiciary. A huge, huge change.
But, and this is a big but, this new equality definitely had its limits. The new constitution created two types of citizens. You had active citizens. These were men over 25 who paid a certain amount in taxes. They could vote. And then you had passive citizens, which was, well, pretty much everyone else. Millions of poor men and all women had no voting rights at all. So really, power hadn't gone to the people. It had just shifted from the old nobility to the new wealthy middle class. The fight was far from over. Which brings us to our fourth section, the Reign of Terror. You see, that compromise government didn't last long. The revolution was about to get a whole lot more radical and a whole lot more violent. This was the Inferno. So in 1792, this radical political group called the Jacobins takes control. They don't want a king with limited powers. They want no king at all. They abolish the monarchy and declare France a republic. And to make it brutally, terrifyingly clear that there was no going back, on January 21st, 1793, King Louis XVI was tried for treason and publicly executed by guillotine. The king was dead, the old world was gone. The man at the center of this new, radical republic was Maximilien Robespierre. And this quote from him is, well, it's chilling. It shows you his exact justification for what became the Reign of Terror. He basically argued that to protect the revolution, to protect liberty, you needed terror. He saw it as a kind of swift, severe, inflexible justice, a necessary evil, to purge France of its enemies. And the instrument of that terror was the guillotine. From 1793 to 1794, Robespierre's government executed thousands and thousands of people they considered enemies of the Republic. This wasn't just nobles and clergy anymore. It was anyone suspected of not being revolutionary enough, including many of the original revolutionaries themselves. A terrifying wave of paranoia just swept across the entire country. Okay, final section, a revolution's legacy. The terror couldn't last forever. In the end, it even consumed Robespierre himself. So after all the chaos and bloodshed, what was the final aftermath? Well, the terror finally burned itself out when Robespierre was executed. After that, a new, more moderate government called the Directory took over, but it was pretty weak and unstable. And this chaos, this power vacuum, created the perfect opportunity for a brilliant, ambitious military general to step in and promise to restore order. His name was Napoleon Bonaparte. But even with the terror and the rise of a dictator, you just can't overstate the revolution's legacy. It completely destroyed the old feudal system in France. It gave the entire world the powerful ideals of liberty, equality, fraternity. And maybe most importantly of all, it championed the radical idea that the right to rule doesn't come from God or from royal blood. It comes from the people. So in the end, we're left with this really complex legacy, aren't we? On one hand, it's this heroic struggle for the rights we all cherish today. On the other, it's a terrifying cautionary tale about how the pursuit of a perfect society can spiral into tyranny and bloodshed. It really leaves us with a heavy question, one that people still argue about today. In the fight for liberty, when does a revolution go too far?